Generosity is the currency of abundant relationships. Because if you want people to play abundant with you, to give you referrals, to go out of the way to give you a review on your business, to do anything like that, the question is, what are you doing to go out of your way to let that person know that that relationship matters to you?
Chad Peterman here, and you are listening to Can't Stop the Growth, a platform for leaders and teams to grow and thrive. We highlight the importance of personal development, pursuing greatness, and always chasing your potential. Let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Can't Stop the Growth. I'm your host, Chad Peterman, and today I have a very special guest on the show with me. We were just talking about off air what prompted me to reach out, and I'll go into a little bit of that story here later. But without any further ado, we'd like to welcome to the podcast, John Israel. How's it going, John?
I'm great, Chad. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, awesome. And so I alluded to it in the opening there of why I reached out to you, being that what it is that you do, I do as well. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about what you do?
So my company is named Mr. Thank You, and we help people say thank you for a living. So we started back in like 08, 09 with a strategic gifting business. So we work with companies, organizations to love on and appreciate their favorite clients and employees or referral partners with some type of a high quality gift. And we'll do all the fulfillment. And with that, being the founder of this business, I found myself in 2016 being a successful small business owner, entrepreneur who was overworked, overwhelmed, and so unhappy. I was ready to walk away from all of it, everything I'd spent my career building. And it wasn't until one day when I came home and I did what I normally do at the end of my workday, which is to complain about my day. I'll never forget the visual because I came home, we had our first child. So my wife was nursing our infant son on our couch. And I'll never forget because I'm coming in complaining about my day and she interrupts me and says, "Sweetheart, if you can't appreciate what we have now, who's to say you'll be any happier when you finally get what you say you want?"
Yeah, that's so powerful.
And it was just kind of a mic drop moment. And it had me really reflect because truly, yes, I have a successful business. Things were going well, but I was getting burnt out and I couldn't find anything to appreciate or be grateful for. And so I had a business coach I was working with, and we had talked about my corporate values, our business values. And one of them was gratitude. And there was this really big dilemma because there's this great quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he says, "Excuse me, I cannot hear what you are saying because who you are speaks so loudly." And here I am, this guy who says his business is all about elevating gratitude on the planet, but yet I don't embody it at all. I'm not living my values as a leader. So we thought, okay, well, what's a way we could do that for a year-long project? And it really came down to, hey, what's a really simple habit, routine, strategy that you can implement every single day to activate gratitude and truly live it? And so we went through a few different numbers, but I settled on handwriting 5 thank you cards every single day for 365 consecutive days. I didn't know what was going to happen when I committed to it, but ultimately it turned into a book, a TED Talk, and a global movement. And our mission is now to inspire 74 million thank you projects around the world. And that's what I get to do. I get to come into organizations and really teach people the competitive advantage of gratitude. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, that's so awesome. I've told the listeners a number of times, a mentor of mine who I actually had breakfast with not too long ago, and she had told me to make sure that you write thank you cards to your team. They need to know you care. As leaders, we know that no one's going to follow you until they really know that you care. And that's what I think is so interesting about this project and what you're doing. And I think the inspiration is something we all can relate to. We've all went home and complained about this person and this situation. As you were with your wife, be met with, well, what are we grateful for? Once you started that project, that 5 thank you notes for 365 days, what were some of the things you started to notice about the company, your leadership?
I think what initially it taught me is there is a lot that is right in front of you to be grateful for as long as you're looking for it. That's the key piece here is, are you looking for it? So as a great example, our natural default is not to be grateful. That's actually very distinct from happiness, which happiness is something that, you don't need to teach a kid how to be happy, but you do need to teach them to be grateful. You have to help them understand the value and how to actually do it. As an example, gratitude is a reflective state. The definition of gratitude is the emotion one feels when you receive a gift or experience something as a gift. It is the interpretation of what you are experiencing. Most of us aren't in the present moment thinking that way. We're thinking in the future. We're worrying about what's going to happen or what this might mean. A great example of this was I go to the airport on day 3 and I'm upset because I get to my gate and I find out my flight is delayed. Well, this is a 2-leg flight, so I've got to get to another connection in the middle of the country. And if this first one's late, then that could make the second one late, which means I might miss it. And then that could screw up my entire trip. And so I'm starting the day highly stressed. Well, here's an interesting thing, Chad. You can't maintain high levels of stress and gratitude at the same time. I was forced into this experience. By the way, this is a little note for people to understand. There were rules with this project. So rule number 1, 5 cards every day had to be handwritten. Okay, couldn't be a text or an email or video. Second rule, every day resets at 0. Okay, so I can't skip a couple days and then do 20 in a day because if something's a true habit, you do it every day, right? Third rule, I could write a max of 3 cards for any one person. And that's because I know myself. And if I couldn't think of somebody, I might write the 75th thank you card to my mother, who maybe she would have appreciated that. But I also thought they would start to lose their luster if that was the case. And the fourth rule was $1,000 to charity for any and every day that I missed writing my 5 cards. So there was a lot at stake every single day. So meaning there was no way I was going to not do this. It kind of forced me into this space of every day saying like, who's doing something good? Where is the good happening around me that somebody is doing that I can publicly acknowledge with a handwritten card? So I get to the airport, I'm upset, my flight's delayed. And the first thing I notice are the pilots from our plane sitting at the Chick-fil-A having lunch because they can't get on the plane because the flight's delayed. And I thought, you know what? Every time during takeoff, I do a prayer for safe travel. And these pilots have delivered 100% of the time. And I thought, man, I've never formally thanked the pilots on my plane. Let's do that today. So I walk up and simply say, hey, do you guys mind if I have a seat? And they're like, yeah, go for it. I didn't know what to really ask them. I didn't know what it's like to be a pilot. And this was the interesting aspect of writing all these thank you cards, which is how do you thank somebody you don't even know you've never spent any time with? And when you look at where language comes from, the word appreciate comes from the Latin word appreciare, which literally means to appraise or to set the value of a thing. And that makes sense because when you want to sell a house, what do you need to do? You need to have an appraisal, someone who's going to come by and tell you, hey, this is what your house is worth. So leadership with appreciation is looking for the value in people. Because at any given moment, we could point out, here's what's wrong with this person. Here's what they're doing. Here's the mistakes that they're making. But at the end of the day, an appraiser's job is to give you a number, which is, hey, I deem this property to be worth X dollars. So if I'm a leader, I need to be looking at my people. And while, yes, they're all imperfect, and I have to ask myself the question, where is the value in this person? What do they do for the team? What do they do for our clients? What do they do that maybe I don't pay attention and recognize? And in that moment, I didn't know these pilots. So the appraisal process is really a process of curiosity. The appreciation process is curiosity, asking things like, hey, so what got you into this work? What's your purpose? What are your top 3 goals over the next 5 years of your life? What's the hardest thing that you deal with in your job? And what was interesting, Chad, I asked these pilots those same questions, right? How'd you get into this job? What are your biggest goals as a pilot? What's it like to be you? What's the hardest thing about being a pilot? I've only heard lots of cool things like the great travel perks and people have been wanting to be pilots since they were little kids. What blew me away was when I said, what's the hardest part? And they said, the hardest part is how much we miss back at home. Birthdays, anniversaries, special events. And then one pilot gets all excited and he says, except for this year, this is the first time in 12 years that I get to be home for Christmas Day. And it broke my heart because I thought, man, I didn't realize this is their life. And I wonder how many of us leaders don't realize what it truly is like to be on your team. What are they struggling with? What do they really want out of the job? Why did they even show up in the first place? I say that to tell you that that conversation taught me how to appreciate people. And I went on to write a letter to those pilots. And this was wild. Here's what I put inside of it. I said, dear pilot, I'm sure it's strange to receive a thank you card from a passenger. But as I boarded the plane today, I was thinking about how much I'm going to miss my family on this trip. And then I realized this is what you do every day for your job. I can't imagine how many birthdays, anniversaries, or special events you sacrificed for your work. Not to mention the hundreds, if not thousands of hours you spent in the cockpit training for your job because nobody becomes a pilot by accident. All of that to have some bad weather, a slightly bumpy landing, and then have people complain about it. So whether you hear it enough or not, I just want to say thank you on behalf of myself and everybody on our flight. Fold up the card and I write 2 cards in that first flight for those first 2 pilots. We land in the next destination. I make my second flight. So I do it again for 2 more pilots. I don't normally do this, Chad, but at the time I only had my business stationery with me. which has my name, cell phone number, and email physically printed on the card. This was what was bananas. Within 24 hours of landing in Philadelphia, 3 out of those 4 pilots personally contacted me to say thank you for the card that they received. One went on to say, John, in my 20 years of flying, I have never received a thank you card from a passenger. And I just thought, that's crazy. And how is it even possible? These guys with such a big, important job, not even getting the gratitude and appreciation that they deserve. What about everybody else in their careers, in their lives, in their marriages? And I think that moment really taught me there's a huge appreciation deficit in the world. And I think as leaders, it's not necessarily in your job description. It's not like you're a bad person if you don't take the time to appreciate your people. But the reality is, it does create a culture of connection that develops a relationship that people don't want to leave because we go where we're appreciated. We go where we feel like we're valued. And if we're just another number, another employee, then I might as well just go somewhere else that I can make more money if I'm going to be the same person wherever. So I think appreciation really becomes this glue that people get stuck to and get attracted by inside of their organizations.
I think that's just so powerful. And I appreciate you sharing that story. I've written a couple thank you cards to pilots. It's a very awkward handoff when you hand it to the stewardess and you're like, hey, can you give these to the pilots? And they kind of look at you like, I was like, they're just thank you cards. I just appreciate what they do. But yeah, just a great story. And I think your point about there's a deficit of appreciation. I'll often start off meetings by, hey, let's just go around the table and I need to know one thing you're grateful for. And to me, you can see the power of gratitude when you see everybody stressed or it's just not a great mood. And you go around and you say that, and all of a sudden you can feel it that the mood just sinks down and everybody understands, like, hey, we're solving problems here, but it's not the end of the world. And we've got a lot to be grateful for. So let's go into this with an open mind and understanding that we all have an opportunity here to impact so many people.
Absolutely.
One of the things too that you mentioned was the ability to appreciate people that we're working with, that are working for us. And you touched on it a little bit, but just from a leadership perspective, what were some of the things you may have learned from the project or are learning today as it relates to showing gratitude and that relationship to people actually knowing that they're cared about?
I read about this in the book, but I call it the YNK factor, which is you never know. Like you never know what someone's going to say or do or how they're going to respond. Here's an interesting fact, and I'm curious, Chad, if this is at all related to your personal experience. But so for me, I wrote 1,800 thank you cards throughout that year, 1,825. And if you had to guess, Chad, what percentage of people who got all those cards responded or reacted or told me that they got them?
Less than 1%.
So it averaged at 10%. But think about this for a moment. Out of 1,825 people that I took the time to personally sit down and write, because as you heard in that pilot card, these weren't just like, hey, thanks for the great job. This was like, here's what I see in you. Here's what's great about you. Here's what you struggle with. And I just want to acknowledge you for doing all that and being a great asset to this team, this company, the world, whatever it was. So there was a lot of thought that went into it. With that math, that's 182 people who said anything, which also means about 1,600 people said nothing. So I think a lot of people may have done this for a period of time and then stopped. Now, why is that? Because they don't see or hear anything back. And there's this experience of like, well, does anyone really care? Does this really matter? So ultimately what happens is then we're like, well, if it's not worth my time, I'm just going to stop doing it. And then ultimately what we don't realize is the micro impact that these things have. I remember writing them to obviously like friends that were just close to me. And I'm a big fan of on purpose fathers, like dads who run businesses that want to be a good father. And so those are what guys like I really poured into because I think that fatherhood is one of the greatest solutions to a lot of the world's problems right now. And so I acknowledged my friends and most of them didn't say anything. But when I would bump into them at places, I remember a friend of mine was like, man, you don't realize this, but your card showed up at the perfect time. I had just come home from the office and my wife was pissed at me and we had some issues going on with clients. And I just felt like a bad person. Like I was deeply depressed. And then when I read your card, it had me feel like, okay, I'm actually a good person. I'm doing something valuable in the world. And I just want to say thank you for reminding me of that because I was really not present to it. Something to realize is when you actively make gratitude a part of your life, you don't know what that trickled impact is of what it's going to do for somebody. Because here's the sad thing, especially in leadership, you might be the only place they go to for a positive environment. I remember that when I was with our sales team a while back, there was a woman who came into the office one day. It was interesting because she was always a little awkward. She was kind of even relatively pessimistic and negative, but I was like, whatever, love what you got, right? And I remember one day she comes into the office and she just tells me, I just want you to know I don't get any of this when I come home. And this is the most positive environment of my life. So I just wanted you to know how much I really appreciate that. And that's who you might be. You might literally be the person that they're drawing strength from that has them even feel my life is worth living. Like that's partially why work is so important. We want to do meaningful work in our lives. Well, how do you know it's meaningful unless somebody acknowledges you for it? That is one of the values of human relationship. It's not required, but it is a value inside of relationships. If we're going to take this to the scope of loyalty for a team member, we are loyal to those that we feel good around because they're providing an environment that we can be our best selves. And depending on the type of business you run, especially if you've got a lot of worker bees out there, this is super important. Even if they don't show it to you, they don't tell you, hey, thanks for the thing, you probably are and very likely are one of the most positive environments in their lives.
So powerful. One of the things I wanted to touch on that you said there that I think is important, and you said it prior as well, where a lot of people can get frustrated in this because we're so wired to want a response. Like, well, why am I doing something? I need a response to validate that what I did was worth something. And in the book, one of the things you talked about, which is just perspective. How do we view an opportunity? How do we view the act of putting down your thoughts and what someone means to you and what you think of them? How we view that. Can you talk a little bit about your take on perspective and the role it plays as it relates to kind of this whole project?
Yeah. And what's interesting is the story I have about that was actually after the project was over for about a year. We wrote them to clients, to team members, to referral partners, of course, family, friends. And the crazy thing, Chad, was even with my own family, like mom, dad, sisters, brother in laws, all those immediate people, that 10% number still stayed true. Like most of my immediate family didn't even say anything. That includes my mom. Now, that one was pretty hard. I love my mom. We've had some struggles at different times in our life where we weren't very close. I love my mom. I know she loves me, but it did hurt a little bit that she didn't say anything. Well, at the time, just to give some perspective as well, my father had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease several years prior to that. And so he was nearing towards the end of his life. He was pretty ill. He couldn't really do anything for himself anymore. My mom was basically taking him to the bathroom, brushing his teeth, all that stuff. And so she was really his full time caretaker. So one of the days I visited my mom back in San Diego, California. I brought my whole family, but they were all asleep. Dad was asleep, just me and my mom sitting at the dinner table. She looks at me and says, John, I have to tell you something. I got your thank you letter and I so wanted to appreciate it, but I am in so much pain taking care of your dad by myself. I couldn't harness an ounce of gratitude. That really shook me. I don't know your relationship with your parents directly, but the person who's raised you in your life is struggling for survival in the emotional sense. You're compelled. You've got to do something. And I was busy running my business. We live in Texas, so we were far away. We would see her during holidays. And I just realized she needs something. And I said, Mom, what do you need? How can I help? What can we do? And she said, I'm the youngest of five kids. I would love if all of you kids came out for a full week and just watched dad and I could leave to go do something, just anything. And I was like, you got it. And I went into business mode and I got all my siblings on a conference call and I'm like, hey, we got to help out mom, explain the whole story. And everybody picked a week and they can go out. I was the second to last person to go. I got to spend a week with my dad and it was really amazing, very challenging to physically do what my mom was doing every day for years. And then my youngest sister got to see him last. And Chad, he passed away that weekend after she left. And I think back because while what we're talking about is, yes, gratitude for the people around you that maybe we take for granted, there's also an aspect that if somebody doesn't respond, you don't know what they're going through. So when you talk about perspective, that was a huge perspective shift because sometimes what happens when we don't get a response to like a gift that we send or a thank you card or something that we do, we start to feel like a little justified, a little like, I can't believe they would do that. What a jerk. Or is it something that I did? Are they mad at me? And we're making it all about ourselves. You can't talk about gratitude without simultaneously talking about generosity. Generosity is when something is given freely without expecting anything in return. But is that how we usually play? In the moment we start to get upset that someone didn't respond to our thank you card or our gift, we have stepped out of generosity and stepped into a transactional relationship, which is, yes, I did something nice for you, but I actually really wanted to hear something back. That was a heart shift that when that happened and I realized I need to give up the need to hear anything back ever about a card. Case in point, how we met on LinkedIn. Somebody that we mutually know, like you posted about your thank you card journey, and someone said, "Hey, you got to meet John Israel." And then I watched the video and then I looked up you and I listened to a few podcasts. I'm like, I like this guy. He's got the same values. He's a dad. He's got a business. I should get to know this guy. So I just wrote a handwritten card to you and I sent it out. And by the way, I do that all the time to people because for me, I think it's a great source of connection. I didn't need anything. I think I even specifically wrote like, "Hey, nothing asked for here. Just wanted to make a connection to someone who I think is a really valuable human being." And next thing you know, you reach out, we got a podcast going. Here we are today. So I think that for this to live and this steps into a space that we call joy. Joy is this heightened feeling of happiness that is sustainable. That comes from generosity. Because when you're constantly playing that way with people, generosity is the currency of abundant relationships. Because if you want people to play abundant with you, to give you referrals, to go out of the way to give you a review on your business, to do anything like that, the question is, what are you doing to go out of your way to let that person know that that relationship matters to you?
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. I think there's so many times where if we think about all of the things, as you pointed out, if we had to label all of our interactions either transactional or generosity, what does that look like? I think about this a lot because you mentioned you never know what someone's going through and why they didn't respond or what was preventing them from it. I think another piece of that is just kind of how people are wired. They may think that that is the greatest thing ever, but they don't know how to respond. They wouldn't be able to put their feelings down on paper or they feel uncomfortable maybe responding. I think there's so much of that that I think in my time, what I've learned is that people respond differently, that you could write them all the same thank you note and they'll all respond a little bit differently based on how they're comfortable. And I think that that's one of the things that we have to understand. And I think your point about being transactional is so critical because in leadership, we oftentimes think that it's transactional. Like, I'm the manager. You should do this because I am this person. It's like, no, that's not how this works. How can you, as a leader, be more generous? How can you show people that you care and expect nothing in return? Because it's that transactional thing that always is out of balance. We always feel like we're giving more than they're giving. And then it gets to be this weird comparison and no one knows where we stand. And then oftentimes, when there's that going back and forth, what happens? Well, that person leaves their manager because they're tired of keeping score. And there's really no need to do that. So I think that's an incredibly important point that you make with generosity. I think the other piece that the quote that I read in your book is you say, inside every life experience, there is a gift. Your job is to find it. It sounds like that's what you found with your mom and your dad there in that situation. But tell me a little bit more about what that means and how people can embrace that philosophy.
My favorite experience of this during the project was I'm a graduate of Gonzaga University, so small college in Eastern Washington. Got a pretty decent basketball team. That's what we're known for. I didn't play, only 5'8". I'm not that fast, but I love basketball, right? So every year, March Madness is like the biggest thing that I engage in. And so in 2017, like during the projects, this is like 2016 to 2017 was the overlap. The Gonzaga Bulldogs made it to the NCAA national championship and we were playing the UNC Tar Heels. So huge, big deal. Furthest our team has ever gone in the sport and we lose. Ugly game. Our number one guy played his worst game of his career. I mean, just like so many things bad could have happened. And so at the end of this, it's 9 o'clock at night. My wife puts the kids to bed and I am not in a good state. I was so sad, depressed, angry all at the same time. Yet here it is, 9 o'clock at night, Chad, and I've got to write 5 thank you cards. That is the last thing on planet Earth that I want to do. Now, there is a moment, like we talked about this in the very beginning, so I want to pull it back here. The definition of gratitude is the emotion one feels when you receive a gift or experience something as a gift. So that makes sense when you think of it in the logical perspective. If I were to give you a gift unexpectedly, you might feel, wow, grateful. Yeah, well, he gave me something I didn't expect. The other part of this is the experience of something as a gift. Let's take an example. Early in your life, maybe your teenage years, like your first boyfriend or girlfriend, and that relationship ended. How did you feel? And it's like, women suck, men suck. This is terrible. Life is over. So to ask a kid in that moment, hey, what are you grateful for? He'd be like, nothing. Life is awful. But with time and perspective, we can all look back on that moment and say, well, I'm glad that happened. Because that happened, I learned this. Because that happened, I met this person over here. So we can look back on past painful experiences and feel gratitude. And so the question becomes, how long does it take you to feel gratitude from a painful experience? And the answer is as long as it takes you to find the gift. And so here I am, I'm in my home office, got some thank you cards sprawled out in front of me. And so I'm just in my brain thinking like, where's the gift? Where's the good? What's positive here? And it was like a light bulb. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't watch my team lose. I just watched arguably the best team in my school's history play the game of basketball. That deserves to be celebrated. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to write a thank you card to every single member of the Gonzaga men's basketball team and the coaching staff. And so for the next week, I was looking up everyone's games, their highlight reels, and I was making every card very specific to what their contribution was, even to the point with the red shirts saying, hey, thank you for helping our team be its best because no championship team is made in the championship game. It's made with every practice that led up to it. So while you didn't play this season, I'm grateful for how much better you made the team. And you talk about a 180 in not days, not hours, talking seconds to find the gift in this painful experience. I suddenly felt joy and I got to write it all out. And it was amazing how quickly it changed it. So end of that story is 2 months later on my birthday, May 21st, I'm out to dinner with my wife and out of her purse, she pulls this envelope and she says, oh, by the way, this came for you in the mail today. And it's addressed from Gonzaga men's basketball. And I open this letter, and I know we're doing this visually on a podcast, but I'm going to show you. So I have this hung on my wall. This is a handwritten card from Mark Few, the head coach of Gonzaga men's basketball. This dude makes millions of dollars a year. And he sent me a handwritten card to say thank you for showing up for the team with positive energy during one of the hardest times in the school's history for the sport. And I couldn't have paid this guy to write me this card. So when you talk about why is it so important for a leader to show his gratitude, is because people know how busy your time is. They know how much your time is worth. So if you use that time to appreciate me, that is night and day difference than if it came from anybody else. So there's two things with that. Number one, the importance of loving on people during challenging times, but also the impact of the perspective we take on the challenges in our life. Because when you can look at, well, yes, there are challenges here, there is something good if you're willing to look for it. However, the quote was that you said, right? In every life experience, there is a gift and your job is to find it. And I challenge audiences during my keynotes, like I bet there are moments and times and experiences in your life that you wish never happened to you. And I'm not saying that they were a good thing or that they should happen again to anybody else. But if you allow yourself to answer the question, where is the gift? Where is the good? Or even simply, where is the value of this experience? You can find something and that will transform it from one of pain and resentment to one of gratitude and peace. Chet, that changed my life, bro. Like that was something beyond business. I mean, I was able to go back and look at all these things and challenges and say, if you see in the book, there's a whole part where I stopped writing thank you cards. And I started writing apology cards to people that had hurt or harmed during my life. And I apologized for like a business deal that fell apart that was something that I had done, or all these different things. And each time I did that, it was like this unexpected like healing process that I stopped making myself feel guilty for mistakes I'd made, because you know what? Everybody does. And inside of that, I got forgiveness from myself, as well as some people reached out and said, hey man, don't even worry. It wasn't even a big deal. I had some of those conversations with clients. By the way, it wasn't like significant, gnarly things all the time. Sometimes someone was just upset about how an order shook out. And I owned what was our part to own. And I had people who reached out that started business with us again because of how we responded to when they canceled their deal. This actually became a business process that every time someone cancels an order, we automatically send them a thank you card, appreciating them for the time and the opportunity to serve them. And if anything changes, to come back. We found 50% of our cancellations came back to buy from us again after we implemented a thank you card into the process.
That's some powerful stuff right there. I think that last thing that you just said, I wrote that down because everybody talks about customer retention and how do we get people? But again, it's taking that relationship from a transactional relationship to one of gratitude and appreciation. And I think that's just so powerful. But I can understand there's probably a few common questions that you always get when it comes to your philosophy of it needs to be handwritten, needs to be a thank you card, this, that, and the other. Tell us a little bit about what's your philosophy on why it needs to be handwritten.
I will tell you that I am not religious to the fact that it needs to be a handwritten card. My project was very specific to that being one of the rules. And I think that email, text, video, and handwritten cards are all different formats of being able to express the same thing. What I love about a handwritten card is the time bomb effect. which is like you send it to somebody after an interaction, they don't get it for 3 to 5 days. And then it suddenly shows up when they've not been thinking about you. And then it's like represences you in their mind from a positive state. That's a really good thing, especially for your business. But on some sides, I actually think that a video is great, especially if it's someone that you've been out of touch with for a while. So, as an example, this is like a little hack that I would give people if you're not in a good state to start your day. If you got a big day with a lot of appointments, a lot of clients, and you're not feeling great, just pull out your phone, find someone's contact you haven't talked to in a while, pull up your text message and a video, and then just record a video of you just telling this person how much you love and appreciate them. What's really fun about that is that that one actually can get you a very quick response because people will see it. They watch the video. They're like, oh my gosh, this was so great. I appreciate you too. You're awesome. How's everything going? Let's catch up. And then I would do like 3 to 5 of those in the morning. They'd be like 15 to 30 seconds each. And I like because it's really quick. But here's the deal. If I just had coffee with a client and then I immediately sent them a video thanking them, that's awkward. I would rather write you a card now and then have it show up in 3 to 5 days later and then have that be an anchor reminding you of this experience we had because that's more appropriate for the context. So I actually think that all of them can work, but you just need to do it in the right capacity. The other part with this is it's super duper important. And I know you're going to get this, which is make sure that the card is personal. We have something we call the ABCs of a legendary thank you note: attitudes, behaviors, and challenges. There is a difference between recognition and acknowledgement. Recognition is saying, thank you for what you did. Hey, thanks for the referral. Here's a $20 gift card to Starbucks. Hey, thanks for this thing you did. Appreciate it. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But when you think of the impact, like Chad, I'm just curious, you've written a lot of cards. Do you have any that people have written you that you've actually like hung on to and kept?
Yes, I've got a couple of them for sure.
And they're probably more than one sentence and they didn't come with a Starbucks gift card. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there's something to the thought that goes into it. So the ABCs, the A stands for attitudes, which is what are the character qualities of this person? That they're loving, that they're kind, that they're supportive, that they're trusting. B stands for behaviors, which is what are their actions? What did they do? Did they send you a referral? Did they stay late for a job? Did they do something that was out of the ordinary? And then C is the challenges, which is what did they overcome or give up in order to do what they did? This piece, I think, was actually what I learned was very powerful in a lot of the cards, which is pulling it back to that pilot example I gave in the beginning. If I had simply just written, hey, thanks for getting us to the destination safely, they might have read that and be like, oh, that's cool. Thanks. Probably throwing it away. But no, it was, hey, thanks for getting us to the destination safely. And thank you for all the hard things you deal with in your job, in your personal life, and still show up with a smile on your face and do an amazing job. Thank you for that. That's called acknowledgement. When you look at the value of your investment in expressing gratitude, think of the ABCs because that's going to make your cards. And by the way, you can just do that with your words. It doesn't even need to be a handwritten card. If you simply get better at acknowledging people publicly at a staff meeting. Hey guys, we're having our meetings today. I just want to acknowledge Jeff. Guys, Jeff showed up as a leader last week. We had a job that the client was being fussing about it, and he showed up off his clock and had a consultation with this client, took an hour with them, and they actually just left us a 5-star review because of the extra work that Jeff chose to do for this client. Like, dude, let's everybody give Jeff a round of applause. That's acknowledgement. Most people are terrible at that. They're just saying, hey, Jeff, great numbers last week, bro. The end. And that's okay, but that's not getting into the root of what people really do and who they really are.
Absolutely. That's some great advice as it relates to really just packing some punch with what you're doing as opposed to just doing it to do it. I can't thank you enough. I've got a whole page of notes here. I've been doing this for a couple of years now, but I have learned a couple of things here today. So can't wait to get those rolling. One last question, and then I want you to let everybody know where they can find you, where they can possibly get the book, because I think that you could be hugely beneficial regardless of industry in helping people really spread that gratitude and appreciation. What is your favorite thank you note that you've received?
I actually read this the other day. It was actually a woman who had met me at a conference. And at the end of my keynotes, I always have everybody in the room write one thank you card to somebody in their life that has impacted them. And she decided to write that to me. And when I read it, she shared with me her story, which was that of having been a relatively unsuccessful person for a lot of her life and feeling like her life didn't matter and was considering ending her life. And that while she heard my presentation, she got to see that there was value in her life and that her story does actually matter and that her overcoming her failure is actually fuel for her to work harder in her life and she was no longer going to kill herself. I think that made the entire project worth it. And there's been one that wasn't a card, just a communication. So I did a speech for a bunch of young entrepreneurs a few months ago. This kid walks up and he's like 18 and he says, I haven't talked to my dad in over a year. My parents split up. He didn't even come to my graduation. And I decided to write my thank you card to him. And I decided to be the one who extended the olive branch first. And I thought, man, an 18-year-old did that. So I think for me, it's not even as much the cards that I've gotten, but it's the cards that I've heard written that have been sent to people. That's why I do it. And I think that what was an underlying, very unexpected piece was to see how much doing a project like this reconnected people that actually mattered. And so my action step I tell every audience member or podcast listener is make a list of 30 people who've impacted your life, small to big. The person who does your coffee every day to the person who's a teacher that impacted your life. And I created a little PDF document. If you go to mrthankyou.com/30, so mrthankyou.com/30, the number's 30, there's a PDF challenge you can download and it just gives you prompts of who you can write your cards to. It shows examples of cards that I've written. And I would recommend start with that and then just start to notice what happens. Just notice the connections that start to show back up in your life and the cool things. Like we didn't really get into this chat, but what was wild was just the blessings that showed up in my life randomly. I got offered to give a TED talk. TED reached out and said, hey, we heard your story. Would you be willing to come to TED and share that? And I was like, don't you have to apply? But because I had just chosen for a period of time, I'm just going to spend my life loving on people. That became a TED talk. And so I think that if it's impactful, it might have some impact on you. So try it out for 30 days, see what happens, and stay in touch. Everywhere on social, you can find me as at the Mr. Thank You. So MR Thank You, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all the things. I'd love to hear from you because I love hearing stories of cards that you wrote and feedback that you got or anything. And again, you might not hear anything. You might hear some things. It's not about that. It's about you getting to end your life knowing that you've spent it letting everybody know who matters to you that they matter. Last thing I'll share, Chad, about 3 months into the project, I get a call from my best friend, Nick. Nick was the best man at my wedding. Unfortunately, he was calling to tell me that his father had just passed away. What made it worse was I had written Nick's dad a thank you card and it was sitting on my desk while Nick was telling me the news. And while I'm not happy that that happened, I am grateful for the lesson, which is the urgency of what we're talking about. Because the greatest fallacy in relationships is the assumption that they'll be there tomorrow. And you don't know when the last time is you're going to get to love on somebody and tell them how much they mean to you. So just do it for 30 days. Focus on people that are the most impactful in your life. Try it out and tell me it hasn't impacted your life. That's it.
Absolutely. John, I think that the point you made there at the very end really sums everything up. You're going to get out of life what you're looking for in life. And if you're looking for gratitude, if you're looking for reasons to be grateful, more often than not, you're going to find them. If you're looking for negativity and pessimism, more oftentimes you're going to find it. And I think you do a great job of illustrating how powerful expressing our gratitude, creating relationships, and really just taking the time to let others know that they are important. The more of that we can have in this world, the better leaders we're going to be, the better companies we're going to run, and the better relationships we're going to have. And as you pointed out in a number of your stories, the better relationships we may create, not between us and someone else, but between someone else and someone that they need to connect with. And to me, that's where this thank you card premise, it's compounding. You write a thank you card to somebody to tell them how great they are, and they're like, oh my gosh, I probably need to thank so-and-so. It just keeps compounding to the point where we begin to really, really focus as a entire country, as a world, as a state, whatever it is, on expressing our gratitude for others. And again, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story. Listeners, you had to have learned something today. What I challenge you to do is go put that into action, because when you put what you've learned into action, you truly can't stop the growth. Thanks again, John. Thanks again, listeners. We will talk to you again next time. Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to get connected, you can find me at chadmpeterman.com. To see what our team's up to, you can visit petermanbros.com. As always, keep growing out there.